Hello, record nerds of the internet. Today we're going to talk about Saturday Night Live, punk rock, and this 7-inch. Coming up.
Six in the morning.
Okay, so if you're talking about Saturday Night Live and punk, you got to kind of know that Saturday Night Live had kind of a fraught history with punk, going back to when John Belushi wanted Fear to play Saturday Night Live, and then they completely destroyed the set, they being the punks from DC, like Ian MacKaye and those guys. And then, I think a year or so later, Elvis Costello got on there and then played a song they didn't want him to play, so he got kicked off and banned. And then the Replacements came on and played a really drunken set where they swore and they were acting like fools. So punk and Saturday Night Live doesn't seem to mix, really. However, about 11 years ago, there was a skit in which a group of old men have a band reunion at the one guy's daughter's wedding. And that band was called Crisis of Conformity. If you've never seen the sketch, pause this. Pause it right now. Press the pause button, go watch. Open another tab. Go to YouTube, type in SNL, punk wedding. Watch the sketch, because it's pretty funny. We'll wait for you. Are you done? Are you done now? Oh, okay, you're done now. All right. So, if you are a fan of hardcore punk from the 80s, there's a lot of Easter eggs in there. As you've just seen, the sketch opens with a still shot of the sign outside of the banquet hall announcing the wedding of Cadena and Norton, Des Cadena of Black Flag and Greg Norton of Husker Du. And then if you pay attention to the lyrics, it's like all of the Reagan era hardcore tropes of we hate Reagan, we hate fascism, we hate jocks, we hate cops, we hate suits and ties. And then at some point it almost turns into a cover of Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies. It's really just well done for, if you're a fan of that music, it is just hilarious. Because it hits up so many things within that genre that it's hilarious. And then at some point, this record was released. And what this is a 2-song 7-inch from the band Crisis of Conformity, the fake band in that sketch. So this is somewhat meta, because it sort of pretends like it's an old record. It looks like an 80s hardcore record. It has 2 songs, which is not very 80s hardcore if it wanted. It really should have like 4 to 8 songs, maybe even 12 songs, to really get the vibe of an 80s era hardcore band. But alas, there's only 2 songs. So I didn't even know this was that hard of a record to find. I thought that this was pretty common, but apparently it's pretty rare. I know that because someone on a Facebook group about punk had posted a link to that sketch. And then I said, hey, there's actually a 7-inch for that. And a guy was like, take pictures of it, because it seemed like you never saw it before. So it came out in Drag City, which was a small indie label out of Chicago, as you can tell. If you look here, it says vocals, bass, drums, guitar, Crisis of Conformity. It doesn't actually list who is in the band. But if you look at the 7-inch itself on the label, it says Armisen wrote the songs. Which makes sense, because you probably didn't know this. Maybe you knew this. Fred Armisen was into punk. He was in a band called Trenchmouth, which was sort of a grungy sort of punk band from the 90s. And Dave Grohl was in this sketch, who was obviously in the Foo Fighters and Nirvana and Scream and and Mission Impossible. Was that his band? And then Dane Bramage. That LP is really good. I have that LP. It's pretty good. If you ever find it and it's not a couple $100, you should buy it. It's pretty cool. If you're into that early 80s emo sort of DC's thing. Anyway, but I digress. So, although it would imply that Fred Armisen does everything, and look, there's Fred Armisen right there, you kind of get the impression that he's singing, but I think that looks like they cut a fist into his face to make him look like he's singing. He's probably just at a show. But look at this guy. That's Dave Grohl. So I'm going to guess that Dave Grohl plays some of the instruments on this. And they just don't say that because when you're signed to a major label, you're not really allowed to be on other stuff. If they really wanted to go hard on the punk rock sort of Easter eggs, they should have said that Dale Nixon played on it. Dale Nixon was a fictitious name that I think Greg Ginn from Black Flag started using when Unicorn basically owned all of the Black Flag trademark. Came up with Dale Nixon as a way to sort of circumvent that. And that's sort of been used by lots of bands, punk bands, post Black Flag, as when like Brian Baker has done that when he did the Dag Nasty Epitaph record. It says Dale Nixon, but it's Brian Baker. He just couldn't put Brian Baker because he was in a band called Junkyard at the time, which he was contractually obligated to. We are way down a rabbit hole, people. Anyway, so this is about $100 record at this point, maybe more. I don't know how many of these they pressed. Maybe 1,000. It probably can't be much more than that. So guys, you've learned something new. Maybe you've learned a couple of things new. You've learned that Fred Armisen of SNL is into punk rock music. You learned that this 7-inch exists for the sketch from Saturday Night Live. You may have learned about the Fear, Elvis Costello, and the Replacements big on SNL being crazy. Go watch those videos. Maybe I'll link those in the bottom. I think they're all available on YouTube. At one point, SNL was very, very into keeping all of that stuff out of the public eye, and I think they care less now. But in the earlier days of YouTube, you can find that stuff and it would disappear real quick. But I think it's out there now more than it had been. Crisis of Conformity. Oh, and even this is even the name Crisis of Conformity is sort of like a play on Corrosion of Conformity, the band from North Carolina. There you go. Crisis of Conformity. Not to be confused with Corrosion of Conformity. Look at that young Dave Grohl. Pretty weird. I wonder who this guy is. If this guy's watching the video, say what's up. Want to know what you're up to. Have a good day.